Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Korea This Week. I'm your host, Sang Kim, and today we have Yong Kwon, our communication director, with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a while. We were on a summer break for a little bit. Now that we're back, are officially back on the first day of fall, so you should expect us to, be on every week. We are changing the time a little bit, so instead of 2 p.m., we'll be now on 3 p.m. from now on, so stay tuned for our weekly videos. Okay, so with that said, we have another busy week, so let's get started on the news for this week.
Mm-hmm.
So, Yong, so this week is the UN General Assembly week. The leaders from the 193 members are gathering in New York to talk about multiple issues. So what's on the general agenda for this year?
Well, I think the big issue this year is climate. And in Washington, D.C. as well, for those of you who are here, you'll probably notice that there are protesters on the street protesting the inaction by world leaders on, or rather, in their perception, inadequate effort by world leaders on climate action. So that'll be a big topic in the UNGA as well. And President Moon will be also participating in a discussion with our world leaders on global responses to climate change.
Right.
So that's a central one.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond that, I think South Korea in particular, would be interested in talking about the issue with Iran and the situation in the Persian Gulf, which has escalated quite dramatically in the last week.
Absolutely.
So I think that's something else that the global leaders are interested in, also something that the South Koreans are particularly interested in, given the dependency of South Korea on oil that goes through the Persian Gulf.
Right. So speaking on South Korea, so President Moon Jae-in is in New York this week. He arrived yesterday and he'll be here until Thursday. He's expected to give a speech tomorrow, I believe. And do we know what topic he'll probably discuss at his speech?
Well, his speech will probably talk about inter-Korean engagement and relations. But I think the event that people have thrown a lot of their attention on is actually the engagement that he'll be having with President Trump.
Right.
That's happening today in about 2 hours,
right.
in 2 hours' time, where people are expected that now that the joint exercises are over, now that a lot of the joint exercises in particular, which had been a point of friction between North Korea, South Korea, and the United States are over, that South Korea will try to get President Trump to make a push for engagement with Pyongyang again, to restart talks on denuclearization. So that will be something that I think the Korea policy watchers in particular will be watching very carefully today.
Right. President Trump mentioned that he is signaling push for a new method in dialogue with Pyongyang. So we'll see what that means and what that entails.
Right,
and the working level negotiation is supposed to start sometime soon, but we don't know the exact dates.
Right. I mean, that's been terribly delayed, right? I mean, that's supposed to have started within 6 weeks or a very short time after they met at the DMZ, and that really hasn't picked up, in particular because of the joint exercises. And I think the calculus now is that now that this major obstacle is out of the way, perhaps North Korea will be more attuned to speaking to the United States. And also, in particular, I think South Korea is perhaps wagering that because President Trump, in his Twitter account has indicated that talking to Kim Jong-un might be one of the greatest achievements that he had in his first term. So maybe the South Koreans might be wagering that President Trump might be more keen on speaking with Kim Jong-un, especially heading into election.
Right, especially, yeah. So the summit will be happening in a couple hours, so I'm sure you will hear all about it and all over the news, especially the Korean news.
Right. I mean, if we were lucky, President Trump will just debrief us via Twitter straight.
Twitter. So, yes, let's keep an eye on President Trump's Twitter. In addition to the North Korea issues, obviously, two countries have a lot of bilateral issues that they need to sort out, as well as the Japan issues, right? So, another major issue between U.S. and Korea is the Special Measures Agreement.
That's right.
Which is what to do, how much do we pay, and who pays how much for the U.S. forces in South Korea. And they had agreed on a 1-year term earlier this February, and also that expires December 31st. So they are starting the first round of their 11th Special Measures Agreement negotiation this week in Seoul. So what do we know about this round of talks? Are they expected to be any different than what they agreed on earlier this year?
Right. I mean, the environment is similar slash different at the same time. It's quite hard to assess or predict how the U.S. government will approach it. But the belief was in February, or rather in the previous engagement between South Korea and the United States on burden sharing on hosting U.S. troops in South Korea. The idea was that the negotiations kind of got accelerated and facilitated by both countries' desire to engage with North Korea in Hanoi for the Hanoi summit. So they wanted to wrap this up as quickly as possible to pave the way for bilateral collaboration in preparation for President Trump's engagement with Kim Jong-un. Right. Now, if, there's a breakthrough at the UNGA and President Trump recommits to engaging with North Korea, perhaps we have a very similar dynamic. But right now, we've had quite of an impasse where even after kind of the warming of the frost that existed after the failure of the Hanoi summit at the DMZ summit in June, there hasn't really been a lot of engagement between the United States and North Korea. So the dynamics that the South Koreans and the United States are approaching this engagement is quite different this time. And also, South Korea is recognizing that it needs some chits and leverage in its negotiations, has been doing a lot of things to convince the United States that the demands that the administration is currently making, which is of course, paying for a whole lot more. In fact, rumors suggested that former National Security Advisor John Bolton, when he visited South Korea in August, I think, demanded $5 billion in payment, which is
a lot.
And it's above and beyond anything that anyone would reasonably think to pay. Because I think currently South Korea foots about $2 billion, or rather, that's the total cost of the maintenance of U.S. troops in South Korea, the personnel costs. I think South Korea foots about 50% of the cost currently.
Right, and they agreed to the $871 million.
Right. That's right. So yeah, so given that's $2 billion in total, the demand for $5 billion is somewhat out of a blue moon, right, or out of nowhere, which I think startled a lot of South Koreans. But now perhaps that NSA Bolton is gone, perhaps, and that was also a rumor. That was never a confirmed deal, but perhaps the demands will be ameliorated by a key hawk in the White House disappearing from the scene.
Right. So, I mean, this is, again, the first round of the many rounds of negotiations to come. So they will decide on the amount, how much they pay, and also on the term, too. So they, last year, which they've never done before, they agreed on a one-term basis, which means they would have to be constantly negotiating for the next year, right? So, so hopefully it will be a little longer than 1 year term that they would agree on, and we'll see. And this is a long process that we'll see, like, after meetings, and there are a lot of back and forth that would have to be done, especially around election time, right? President Trump would obviously want to have its allies pay a little more, and he has tweeted in the past that South Korea is a rich country and they should pay for their own defense. So,
right, and I think South Korea also has one other challenge heading into this election, which is that South Korea did take the proactive action to leave its intelligence sharing compact with Japan, which the United States may see as a potential hindrance to the joint defense security effort, and might use it as a vehicle to demand more for South Korea's or demand more money from South Korea for the joint security of South Korea and the United States, because South Korea has taken this action. So I think there are other surrounding events that are happening. But again, South Korea is taking a lot of efforts. I think I began on that topic and kind of trailed off the other in my earlier statement. But South Korea has not only built, of course, this $11 billion new base in Camp Humphrey in Pyeongtaek, it's also deployed its navy, its blue water navy, to the Straits of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf to protect the oil liners. And I think that's a way for the South Koreans to project to the U.S. government that beyond the situation in the Korean Peninsula, that South Korea is doing far more than perhaps that the United States is giving it credit for the security of the United States alongside that of South Korea.
Right. It's not just the dollar amount that they pay that would signifies the importance of the alliance. So,
but I mean, even if it is on the dollar amount, that like it should be substantially less than what the United States thinks South Korea owes, because it is doing so much more than just being on the Korean Peninsula. It's doing a lot of disaster relief work, a lot of also like public health work against like diseases. I remember when the Ebola crisis happened, there was some substantial support that South Korea gave, and I think most recently they're giving a reminder that, hey, listen, like this Iran thing, President Trump, you care a lot about it. South Korean Navy is in the region protecting oil liners. So I think overall, and also like the Middle Eastern countries look to South Korea with certain degree of confidence and trust. I mean, Saudi Arabia reached out to South Korea for assistance on aerial defense after the recent drone attack on their oil refinery base. So I think all of this will go to perhaps helping the South Koreans convince the United States that this burden sharing discussion need not be so onerous.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your insight. Is there anything else you want to mention for this week? Obviously, there are a lot going on with the UNGA and also the summit. But is there anything else our listeners?
Well, there's always a lot. There's always a lot going on. But I would highly encourage people to go check out our director and fellow Kyle Ferrier's writing on the burden sharing discussion on the Diplomat magazine. He has a pretty good overview of the discussion and where the respective positions are. And I would highly recommend people continue following the Peninsula blog, which will no doubt be covering outcomes from UNGA, issues around Jisomia, ties between South Korea and Japan forthcoming. And also, in addition to Korea This Week, people should, of course, sign up for KAI's weekly newsletter, Korea View, which also covers these issues.
Absolutely. So we'll share the link on our comment section so you can have them accessible to you. So with that, thank you so much for watching our Korea View this week. Korea
This
I'm
Week.
getting confused. Korea This Week. We'll be back next week, and also along with many, many exciting KEI events coming up. If you happen to be in Albuquerque, New Mexico, part of our KEI's outreach program, I'll be traveling to Albuquerque for a public event, so I will share that link as well as. And also, if you haven't signed up for our mailing list already, we have a lot of events coming up this fall, including Korea-Japan issues, I believe in the first week of October, right? Mid-October?
Yes. Well, we'll send you that information once you sign up for our mailing.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.